Hello, welcome to Garibaldi Red. Something a bit different today as we look at what it's like to make it in Nottingham Forest and the challenge it presents to a young man from relative fame and money to trying to make sure your dream isn't a short-lived one. Joining me to discuss that is a man who has made the breakthrough and inspired this episode in Lewis McGugan. Lewis, good afternoon. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
Good to have you back with us. And returning to the podcast is former Forest Academy Director and current Liverpool Assistant Academy Director, Nick Marshall, to give us the football club and coach's perspective. Nick, are you well?
I'm good, Matt. How are you?
Yes, good. Good to have you both back with us. There's an earlier episode with Nick on his Forest career that I'll put in the comments, and one with Lewis as well, although obviously Lewis is a regular with us, but I'll send people that direction. So, like I was saying, Lewis, this episode kind of came about after our live show when you were regaling us with a few stories about your career, some which are repeatable and some which probably aren't on here, and that's fair enough. But it struck me and Greg and Mikey, who were sat with you, like, as fans, we don't really understand what it's like to make it as a player. We just see you suddenly appear from the youth team on the pitch and expect you to be brilliant and don't understand when things go wrong. So we're going to kind of try and break that down. What was it like for you from that personal experience of making your debut and suddenly you were Lewis McGugan, who people knew, and they sort of wanted a piece of you? What was that breakthrough like?
Yeah, it's such a long journey to get to that point, and there's so much that happens before that. That is the kind of pinnacle, and that's when kind of it really starts. But the transition, there's no real kind of blueprint. Every player deals with it differently, good, bad, and I think you just got to try and deal with it the best you can. There's no right or wrong way. You try your best. You're learning on the job, and it is a complete difference. Is you can literally be playing in the academy and playing kind of week in, week out, and have a little bit of a name and a reputation. But once you play in front of them people, and you walk onto that city ground, it's like overnight everything changes, and you're now in a big city, in a football city, what Nottingham is. When you play for Nottingham Forest, it's literally the spotlight's on you.
Was there a particular example where something was different? I think you mentioned to us like walking into a pub and people looking at you, which is kind of an obvious one, but out with your mates and people want to say hello and stuff like that. Was that the kind of thing where you realised something different was happening here?
Yeah, it's always, like I said, you're around the football club so much, and you see the fans, and you see as growing up, especially in the youth team, you see the first team and the kind of the attention that they get. So you're not kind of you understand what it is and what will happen, but once that's you and you're experiencing that, it's really strange. There's a few examples, and it's always an example that I use. It's like, especially even at the nightlife and going into the city, it's like you go from kind of not really going out and just being one, for where you go into a bar or into a club, and at times it's like the whole club just stands still and everything. It's like the spotlight's on you and the group, and especially when I used to go out with it, a lot of the first team players went out together, so the spotlight is on there, and they're just a few examples of how it completely changes overnight. And luckily enough, then the camera phones and stuff like that and social media, it was just starting to happen, but it's nothing like it is now. And it's just at that point where you see a lot of players, they just better off staying in and staying indoors, and because that way you just kind of stay out of the limelight, and it's probably the best way to deal with it.
Does that ring true for you, Nick? Not walking into a bar and the pub stopping when you walk in, but in terms
definitely never happened.
In terms of what happened with players you coached at Forest and now at Liverpool, that kind of shock and transition to the first team. Every player's different, but is Lewis's story kind of a familiar one?
Well, certainly that, yeah, absolutely, and he's 100% right that it is different for each person. But that story he just spoke about now, I mean, it's interesting. We've just had a chat to our scholars, and then after that, because I knew I was doing this, I spoke to Jay Spearing, and Jay Spearing's a month older than you, but a month younger than you, Lou. And he told me almost, it's amazing, almost exactly the same story. He went out for a meal, and this is after making his debut, and suddenly he went from having nobody really noticing him to Evertonians like spitting at him and calling him this and calling him that. Liverpool fans wanting to speak to him. So it's 100% something that you almost can't prepare people for that, because it's an experience. It's not something you can say, well, this might happen, and when you do this you have to experience it. I mean, football is very different now in that they don't really go out. They can't go out. They can't do what the lads used to do. You know, I was still quite young when I first came academy manager, so sometimes I'd be out and I'd see the lads out. I'd see the first team lads out, and I'd see some of the older youth team, 18 and 19-year-olds out. You'd be like, okay, this is interesting. So that doesn't happen anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's something that it's very, very difficult to describe. I mean, I've not been through it, but speaking to people, they all say the same. That have done it. It's just a complete turnaround. Jay actually said to me, he said, fans miss that although there's an unbelievable, massive reward, it's actually quite lonely. It's not normal, and it's difficult, he said.
Did you ever find that loneliness, Lewis? I don't know what support network you had around you, but is that something that rings true?
Yeah, I think you can have the best support network around you. I think it still is lonely, because at the end of the day, especially when you're coming in and you break into the first team, you have to understand that most people your age are not experiencing anything that you're experiencing. You can't have that normal dialogue. You can't. Everything changes, and going through the youth team in the academy, that is all spoke about, how things would change and how you can't do things that your friends would do, and leaving that age when you're leaving school and everything, you have to sacrifice so much. So at times you're aware of always you're different, and that's the thing. What you sometimes people don't see, like you're different because you have to be different, because you have to sacrifice so much to try and be the best you can be. So your life is completely different. But going through them early stages, 17, 18, 19, you've got no life experience in terms of that side. You don't know what to do. The football side is really hard to deal with. I think it's harder when you leave the training ground and you're in that kind of public eye and you're in that normal everyday space, because that's something what's completely different. When you're in the football club, everything's kind of, you're in an institution really, and you kind of, everything's being done for you. You train, you go back to at that time, which was the digs, which where the players lived, and you're kind of in between. You're in with everyone else. It's when you have to go on into the normal real world and normal people, and that's when it's sometimes hard to function. And sometimes you have to learn from mistakes, and you have to learn from experiences how to then deal with the next ones better.
Is that something you have to do at Liverpool? And is this something that's changing the game, Nick, that you have to prepare these young men for life away from the training ground as much as making players out of them then?
You can try, but I completely agree with Lewis. I think and again, I mean, Trent's just spoken about it to our players. I think really experiences is the key. You can talk to people in your face. I can sit down with you, Matt, or I can bring somebody in from the SAS, and he can talk to you about how you have to do this and do that, and this is the run you're going to have to do, and you're going to have to go and do some kind of endurance test and stuff, and you can have a psychological. Until you actually experience that, really, none of us have got a clue how that is and how to cope with it. I often say to parents that we deal with now that it's people don't understand that how unique football is for these young kids. I mean, Lou made his debut before he was 18, so he's not even legally an adult at that time. Now, I know I didn't grow up till I was 25. And if I want to be a doctor or a lawyer, it's probably going to take me till 24, 25 to qualify to do that elite job that isn't in the eye of everybody. These young people are in the eye and doing something that everybody would like to do. In Luce's case, at 17. How do you teach somebody to be able to cope with that? It's very, very difficult. It's the, like Lewis has mentioned before, it's a support network around them, but every kid deals with it in a different way. I think it's really difficult, and I think it's possibly one of the key defining things that means that some players go on and have careers where they play 300 games like Lewis did, or 500 games, or or there's plenty of experience of people who have made their debut in the next big thing, and then they kind of fall off the cliff because they can't deal with these things that we're speaking about now. And yes, there's more support now because academies aren't like 5-10 people like we had. There's 70-80 people at some clubs, or 15-20 people. So there is more support. But I still think ultimately it's going to come down to the boys' ability to learn from experience, as Lewis said, learn from mistakes and then move on, hopefully with some support. But this is a lot harder than people think it is. People just see kids going and playing football, think, "Oh, I could do that. I love playing football. This is a doddle." And it absolutely is. And I've got so much admiration for these young men.
Going back to loneliness, this is a looser sense of the word, Lewis, but you walk into the dressing room and you're one young kid, and I guess you'd have trained with the first team, but now you're a threat to some senior players' places. Is that a kind of a lonely position to be in, trying to fit in there when they know some of those players you're gunning for them in a sense?
Yeah, I think that's just the nature of the beast, really. I think that as a young player, and when I then was lucky enough to kind of play and make my debut and then become a senior player, things like that you remember, and you remember the senior players that kind of made sure they know your name. They took the time out to ask you how you was. And listen, you get some senior players that went the different way, and they kind of tried to bully or intimidate you, and that's just part and parcel of life, and something that you've got to deal with. But the ones that try to do it, and normally, I've always spoke about personal experience, like Marlon Harewood. Marlon was brilliant around the football club, and he was that person. But it's you always kind of the ones who have been through that academy process, the ones who have been there, they always realise what kind of is at stake, and at that point, and that sometimes always will help, and to have, even when you end up playing and you're playing week in, week out, to have a change in with good senior pros, I think it's really important. And I think back to Nick's point about when we're looking at making your debut at 16, 17, 18 and to deal with all these stuff, I think that sometimes we forget most of the population at that age, people go to university. They go to university to let to have fun and to learn, and they have 2, 3, 4 years of doing that. And then it's like, right, okay, now it's time to then look at my career and branch off. And now we can't do that. You don't have that opportunity. It's like, as Nick said, it's like 17. It's like, right, you're playing in men's football in front of all these people in this spotlight. Now deal with it. But also, I think what people sometimes don't see is that most players that have come through an academy for a long period of time, they never had a childhood. They never had a normal childhood. So to then go from that or then straight into the men's game, which is, and still not being an adult really themselves, they've had no time to be a kid and to enjoy life as such that it's just been so serious from that point. So it's such a tough kind of thing to deal with. I also think, which is the football club that you're coming through. No, and sometimes it makes difference. And my example is, you look at Liverpool, you look at Everton, you look at somewhere like Nottingham Forest. The city, that is everything. That is like for example, I went to Watford. No disrespect to Watford, but in London, there's so much going on. You can sometimes go kind of for a blind, and you can kind of get up to what you're doing, and you can go out and you can not get bothered and not get really. But in Nottingham and in Liverpool, you're playing for the first team. At times you're God, and everyone sees you. So I think sometimes that can have also an added pressure in terms of the football club that you're coming to make your debut for.
Another thing about time, I'll ask Nick about this as well. Literal like time in the day. You mentioned young kids like to go out, spend their money. If you're a kid who's broken into the first team, you've got a bit of cash in your pocket, but you're only training 2 hours a day. Is time a bit of a demon in the afternoon, in a sense of filling your day and not getting up to no good and not misspend? I mean, we don't know the Harry Toffolo case inside out, but players can spend their money on gambling and all sorts of stuff. Is that a challenge for a young player as well?
Jay talked about that again. That's one of the, without like specifically asking him, he spoke about that. I do think it has changed now. I think first teams tend to be around a little bit longer. Depends on the culture of the club, and really, the culture of the club is often driven by the senior pros. And Lewis mentioned that as well. I think they're huge. The senior pros in and around the young players are massive. If they're really good role models, if they're going to look after the kids, we're very fortunate at this place with the role models up here. They've kind of like, the culture is already there, so they'll be, they will be in for training. Depends when they are training, because they can train at different times now. But it's a lot longer day. But certainly, it's still not a 8 o'clock till get home at 6 o'clock day. So there still is a lot more time, and there's definitely more support now than there was, and there's more education now than there was around the different distractions, because there are also more distractions now than there were before. Some of those distractions are much easier to access. So I remember, for example, early doors, we had a player who from the academy who ended up playing first team football had a problem with gambling, but it wasn't a difficult one to spot, because it'd be Steve Wigley dragging him out of the betting shop one day, and it'd be me dragging him out of the betting shop the other day. Well, now you can just do it in the house. So there's a lot more hidden ways to spend your time not particularly productively, which makes it harder. But they are around more, and the spotlight is even higher now than it was then, and it was still massive. Like Lewis is completely right. Nottingham and Liverpool, two cities that are just obsessed with football. It's very difficult to get away with anything, but that player 25, 30 years ago couldn't do what he did now, but he doesn't need to, because he just do it online.
Did you find that, Lewis, before you had kids and you were, free and single, just filling your time and not getting stuck in your own head? Is that a problem?
I think in the terms of the early stages, you don't really know anything different but football. So you'd always try, and everything will be around football. I think the big thing, as Nick will know, was the digs and where the players lived. I think that was a real big thing, and I think that as a football club, that made so many of the players, and it got them to grow up quicker, and little things like that. But after training, instead of then everyone going and doing their own thing, you go into a house, and you had a lot of your other teammates, and whether it was computer, but it was everyone was still together. So that time away at that point when I was growing up, sometimes you didn't have it. And back to Nick's point, nowadays kind of everyone is doing their different thing, and everything is so accessible from a phone. It's so hard to pinpoint these things and trying to sometimes stop them. And sometimes as players, and sometimes as being in a youth team, you can spot them from your teammates, and you can sometimes notice that doesn't add up, or people's behaviour doesn't really sound like it's going in the right direction. But it's at that point, everyone feels like it's dog eat dog. So if someone's going down that path, that sometimes makes it easier for you to get noticed and be in a team. So I think it's a real hard situation to keep on top of. And I think as life moves on, as kind of technology moves on, and all these things, I think it's becoming more difficult by the day.
How does a young player let their hair down? Is the question I'd ask fans watching this. Fans expect we're paying their wages. They should just go out and be completely professional. And I'd say to all those fans, well, what were you like at 17, 18, 19? How did you let your hair down? They're human beings. They've got to be able to do that somehow. And there's a lot of things that they can't do. All their friends are off doing their bits and pieces, and they necessarily can't do that. So this is not easy. This is not easy. I know it seems easy, and it's they're just playing football, but that's not the case. And like I said, there's been many a player that's not achieved their potential because of these things. And there's players that have achieved the potential and that have really struggled later on in life, whether they're still in their playing careers or afterwards as well. It's tough.
Are digs still a thing, Nick? Do you have them even at Liverpool?
No, and I know at Forest they everybody goes out into house parents, and there's pros and cons of each approach. I guess the approach of having digs, I really liked it most of the time. because there were moments I didn't like it because I'm trying to relax. I'm getting phone calls off one of the can you come round? Oh, that's a pain in the arse. And it does mean that they can't kind of let their hair down, and they're completely surrounded by the same set of people the whole time. So there were pros and there were cons of it.
Well, I think
clubs don't have digs anymore.
Yeah, I think a big thing with that is, like I said, it's like everything. Times have changed, and back then that was something like that was really. Now I don't. It's just you can't really work like that. I know a lot of clubs, if they still do it, they still do the housing where kind of one or two lads would go into a family and do it that way, and that also brings kind of sometimes a bit of pressure on the family who's bringing them in, because obviously they're in control of them and they're there to look after them. And like any parent, when you kind of ex your child to someone else, you expect them to take full responsibility and take care of them. And it's like Nick said, there's so many pros and cons of it all. You just at that time and that stage in life, was that the best way to keep kind of under control as much as possible? But it's I think it's just based on opinions, really.
I liked it because that, Lou. I liked it because I did know that they were going to be, they might not be eating it, but they'd be given the kind of the right food and they'd be at the right time and all those sort of things. So I liked it in that regard. But I do look back and go, did they miss something out? Did they miss something out childhood-wise? You know, as Lou said, the kids now. You know, kids now are in academies from 5 years of age. I think we spoke about this last time. It's a long old journey. Is there a whole identity formed around football? If you then go and make it, that might be okay. But I still think even in that case, they need to be kids and they need to let their hair down. And I do think there's a lot of mental health issues around that we have to be careful of as well. So interesting, when you go abroad, the digs thing is very, very common. Education, digs, school, football club, go out and then do it again, and do it again. And if a few people fall off the wagon because of that, then it's not really a big deal. Whereas here, we're much more aware of, you know, safeguarding, mental health, that sort of stuff. But you're always going to get those issues to an extent because it is so difficult.
How much has social media changed things, Nick? Because we saw like Dele Alli yesterday with his Gary Neville interview, a guy who's been absolutely pilloried on social media. And I felt a bit bad about this, Lewis, because at our live show, someone said, should Forest sign Dele Alli? And we scoffed at it. And I did feel a bit bad. Like, none of us know what goes on behind the curtains. So how much has social media changed things for these young men about what's written about them, Nick, and what they write? They have to be careful about that as well.
It's a sea change. It's a massive sea change. It will be the local paper, and it'd be the Evening Post.
Yeah.
It'd be Radio Nottingham, or it'd be Fletch on whatever Century or whatever it used to be in those days. And they can't go anywhere now because everybody's got a video camera on the phone. They can't, you know, and there's some kind of like, you know, they're not human beings, so everything they do has got to be perfect. And if they're not perfect, it's going to get filmed, it's going to get put on social media. And we can say, us old fellas can turn around and go, why are they even on social media? But actually, that's a big part of their profile. And, you know, their agents have them on social media, might even manage their social media account. So I think it's a sea change. And it makes the position even more lonely.
Do you tell them to stay off it? If they can, or like you say, is it too much? It's just such a part of life now. That's not really fair.
So we would educate. We wouldn't tell them to stay off it. We would educate them around what it can be used for, and we would suggest in terms of what they use it for, and a lot of education around what you post on social media. But we would say that to our, you know, the parents of some of our schoolboys, and you know, you'll see 11, 10-year-olds with social media profiles like 6 million people on Instagram. We had a boy in our pre-academy who was 7 or 8 years of age. I think he had about 10 million followers. Now, my personal opinion, not necessarily the club's opinion, my personal opinion, I think the club might agree, but that's for them, is that's madness. Because the pressure you're building up on that young player is enormous. But we're not their parents.
No, that's not healthy at all. social media wasn't really around when you were breaking through, but it was around when you were playing regularly in the first team, Lewis. How did that influence you? And also, did the local media wind you up with the player ratings and stuff like that? Did you take all that to heart?
The player
ratings previously
and stuff like that. Throughout my career, Nick will know very well. My biggest critic was my dad, so I never looked at stuff like that. That was I always had that opinion of myself. Over the time, I knew if I played well, I knew if I didn't play well. I was that kind of honesty around it. I think some players, sometimes they look at the player ratings, and sometimes that can get into the head and stuff like that. Like back to Nick's point, I see now, and I see some 8, 9, 10-year-olds. They've got their own Instagram pages, and they've got this and that. And I'm just, from my point of view, I look at it. Do I agree with it? No. But I agree from a standpoint. I don't agree from a standpoint of I understand how hard it is to get there. I understand how hard it is to make that journey. And I think sometimes, as parents, I think that they're probably sometimes getting on this social media bandwagon, but they're not understanding what they're doing and the pressure they're building up, and the chances of the other end, as harsh as it may seem, it's so little that people make it. It's how then do you deal with that? How then they recover from that? And how can you, as a parent, are you ready to have maybe that conversation and to go through that period to get them back? Because at that point in time, that's all they do. They play football every day. They think about football. They watch football, and then they're in their head, like my head, like any, is that they want to be a professional footballer. The reality is, for so many, it never happens. And can you have that honesty, and can you have that? And it's hard as a parent, and speaking as a parent, because all you want is the best for your children. But sometimes you have to use your experience, and I've said it before. Do I want my children to be professional footballers? I'm not going to ever stop them, but I don't want to push them into that avenue, because I know what it can do. I know the industry, what it is. It's so, I think everyone just sees the cars, the houses, the lifestyle, the publicity. But as you can tell, and obviously we're talking about Dele Alli's interview, there's so much kind of Monday to Friday that nobody sees. There's so much that people are going through. And the biggest thing about football, what I always say to people is that, and then coming into social media, most people, if they have a bad day at work, or if they have a bad performance at work, once they leave work, no one knows. Nobody knows about it. They can go home, they can be around their friends, they can go out over the weekend. They could have been sacked from their job on the Friday. Nobody knows. If they don't want to take, whereas in football and in sport and now social media, within an hour, it's everywhere. So you haven't even digested it, whatever that may be. You haven't even digested it or dealt with it. But everyone else, so everywhere you go, has an opinion. And they're only going to have an opinion of what that media story is. Whether that's right or wrong, it's only going to be that side. So straight away, so many people are going to have a perception of situation, what's happened. And it could be totally, totally wrong. But that's the perception they've got of you at that point in time. So that's when it comes to the loneliness, where it comes to the point where, do you know what? It's best for me to stay in. It's best for me just to close the curtains, stay in, because of that way I can be in control. And that's why you find so many players suffering from depression and mental health and anxiety, because within a football career, you have no real control, especially even more the social media comes in. So they're at home or in their safe place, when it's just them, that's the most place that they feel in control of their life.
How much, Nick, can you do to prepare a person for this? I always come back to Trent for you, because he's such a big player, and the level of scrutiny he gets for, can he defend is just insane. You know, we wouldn't get that at other football clubs. You know, Nico Williams doesn't get that at Forest. Well, he does off fans, but not from the media and every Twitter account in the world. How much can you, as Liverpool Football Club, prepare him or Curtis Jones or Harvey Elliott? I know he came from a different club, but how much can you prepare them for all this?
All you can do is you can talk to them about these are some things that might happen, and you can hope that they have a real strong influence in their life that will direct them in a certain way. And that might be somebody from the club. It might be a parent. Okay, so for Louis, it was his dad. For Trent, it's his mum. The support network, I always think the support network around the player is absolutely vital. The support network's got to be so strong. And if they've got a really good support network, it makes it much easier for them. And I think Trent's been fortunate that he's got an incredible support network around him, in that he's got an unbelievable relationship with his mum, his family, a few key members at the football club, that it almost provides a bubble around him. But also his personality type is such that that helps him. It's not, you know, I'm not saying it's easy for him. And I often wonder is football now in a situation where there's a certain personality type that can play? So if you think about the types that played in and around the glory years of Forest in 79, 80, and I wonder if those people would actually quite struggle now with all the scrutiny and all the things around them and all the expectations, and they were unbelievable players, and maybe they just adapt to it and there's not a problem. Is football producing a type of personality that can cope with all this? Maybe it's that. But I do think, we can get as many ex-players in as we want to talk about these things to players. What every single ex-player tells us when they come in to give a talk to the players to give the benefits of their experiences, they all say, I sat in a meeting like this when I was their age and I didn't listen. And I thought, that doesn't apply to me. I'll be okay. And it's only when they've gone through it, Lewis mentioned it about the experience, it's only when they've been through the experiences, whether that be being released, whether that be making a debut, playing in a big game, it's only when they've gone through those experiences that they actually then, I get it now. So there's loads more support around now. You've got psychologists around, you've got player care people, you've got safeguarding people, you've got, we've got Jay Spearing as one of our youth team coaches, but as a player coach as well. So he's been there, he's been through the system. We have mentors, we've got Steve McManaman around, we've got John Barnes around, we've got Michael Thomas around, we've got Rob Jones around. Despite all that support, we still have people who, when they go train with the first team, struggle, or might make 3 or 4 games and it doesn't quite work the way that they want it. Maybe that's just because they can't quite reach the level. Maybe it's because they're just a bit unfortunate and the level is so high that there's no pathway for them. Maybe they struggle with the mental aspects of it. So I do think ultimately it's down to experience. And giving them as much help as you can to at least it's not something new in terms of what they've heard about. But ultimately, like I say, we can sit down, somebody could come in from the SAS and tell me all about the SAS and I can think I know everything about it. But as soon as I go in, wow, this is different. And it'd be the same in any walk of life. I think you have to experience it and then you have to be really, really good at learning from that experience. I do think a good support network and really good senior pros, when you get up there, do make a massive difference though. We're very fortunate here.
With hindsight, was the support network in place at Forest for young kids when you were there and Paul Hart was there? I know obviously the game's changed, society's changed, so you can't judge it by the standards that you had at that time, but now judging it in 2023, do you think, I wish we had more in place back then?
I think the advantage now is that I think football, life is about relationships. So I think some players here have formed really strong relationships with members of staff who can mentor them. And I think Trent would be one of those, particularly with our academy director and the then youth team coach, Neil Critchley. But then I'm not sure Curtis Jones really had that. I look back at Forest, I think Michael Dawson, Jermaine Genus, they probably had that. And I can think of other players, perhaps who didn't form a relationship. So there are more people now in football clubs, in academies, that if they don't quite click with this one or this one, they can click with this one. So I think that's the advantage now. I am not sure yet whether all the additional full-time staff in the player care area, in the psychology, and we had a full-time psychologist. We had a full-time psychologist when you were there, Lou? Was Chris Harwood there?
No.
Okay, so just after, that'll just be after. So there are more of those type of people around that perhaps have more specific areas of expertise that can potentially help. But have I seen a massive change in terms of, if you look at the ratio of players who get to a position like Lewis, whether that be training with the first team or playing with the first team, those that then go on and have a career, and then those that then fail, is there a massive difference in the ratio of that now to then, given all this extra support? Not really. I think it's still about the same. Maybe there's more. What there is more support for, though, is if it doesn't quite go right. You know, for example, here we've got an alumni project where anybody who signed a scholarship, become a full-time footballer, whether they just be scholars or first-team players, have got access to all these support services. I think that's changed. So I think the aftercare has definitely changed.
I wanted to ask about money and the influence of money, not specifically for you, Lewis, but in general. Most footballers are working-class kids who probably don't have so much money in their pockets. Suddenly, they're making first-team wages, be it at Forest, be it in Forest in the Premier League now, but Forest in the Championship then, and Liverpool now. Money can kind of corrupt you in a sense that other people want your money, other people want a piece of you, other people are going to advise you badly. How big a challenge is just dealing with that change in, your bank balance in a sense?
Yeah, it's massive, and like I say, we talk about support network, which is key, but it's especially a big thing regarding money. It's like there's no, as your parents don't know. It's very hard to then sit at your child that turns around at 17, 18, 19 and like, right now I'm earning maybe £1 million a year. Well, most parents have not earned that money in their life. So it's very hard for them to now say, right, this is the blueprint, this is the way we need to go about this. They've never experienced money like that. So it's also then, when you're looking at from a child's point of view, it's you've gone through this period of life, your parents have done every single thing they can to try and help you get to this journey. And you've seen them over the time, you've seen them struggle, you've seen them work 2 jobs and whatever the different situations are. It's now for then you're at 17, 18 earning more money than your mum and dad combined. How do you then deal with that? How do you then deal with, right, what's the best way to go about it? I think money is always going to be an issue. It's always going to be a problem in football, and the kind of, where does that come into on that stage? I feel that a big thing from my time and around my time, and I haven't got when I look at as a youth team, I think there was always a massive difference. And I think that as a youth team player, you earned money, but at times you didn't earn very good money in terms of what you was actually doing. But then the jump to get to the first team, that was the drive. How can I get there? It's not just all about money, but it was that opportunity of getting to that level, playing in the first team, also changing my life, changing my family's life, and creating a different dynamic. I think sometimes now the problem is, where's the drive? I think some 17, 18-year-olds are earning more than most first team players outside the Premier League. Well, where's the drive? At my times at Sheffield Wednesday, sometimes I play in the under 23s and there'll be 21, 22-year-olds playing, and they wouldn't have a care in the world. And I used to be just like, you have got no ambition, because at that point in time, they're getting a good wage. They've got a nice car. They can, as we talk about social media, it's in what they call it's in the bio now. I'm a footballer. Everyone thinks I'm a footballer, but they've got no drive. They've got no drive to get to the next level because they've got it all there already. They're comfortable. Whereas when I was coming through, and prior to that, there was such a jump. It was like, that's where I want to be. And I always say and make jokes about it Nick will laugh about the academy and how strict it was and how the rules that was done. And in terms of just little things like make sure we're always tucked in, make sure we're always clean shaven, little things like that. It was just never allowed to wear hats, gloves, nothing like that, and joggers. Because, okay, you looked at the first team, you looked across the training pitch, and you've seen that, and you thought, that's what comes with making that level. All them other stuff, you arrive at that level, you're now playing for the first team, and them little things, that's what you've now earned. Whereas now you see 16-year-olds, they're acting like first team players. And that's the point. So when we talk about money, I think it's totally changed in the sense that players can earn so much more without even kicking a football for the first team. So where is the drive? Where is the next stage? Because okay, you can earn more money, but at that stage, when you're earning such a substantial amount, you can earn more money, but there's not that drive. Whereas when I was in the youth team, the difference, as I'm sure Nick will elaborate on, the difference was so vast. We was playing in the youth team. That was our job. But at times, and I know it sounds mad, sometimes our friends, what would probably work at Tesco, at times would earn more money than what we was doing playing in the youth team, which is some people would think that sounds crazy, but that's what it was, because it was a scholarship and at that point in time. But it was like, right, now I want to get to this next level. That's my drive, because all these other things come with it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want it to sound like a woe is me conversation when there's people, can't pay their mortgage and stuff like that. But I'm talking about and Lewis talking about what money can do to change a person rapidly, I suppose, as well.
No, he's 100% right, by the way. And we were probably at the extreme end in terms of some of those standards, and that came really from Paul. I learned that from Paul, to a point of even checking kids' bank balances, which you could never get, because you never do now, to make sure they were doing a little bit of saving. And always used to make me giggle, because next week I want to see bank balances, and suddenly, you've got to save £10 a week over the last 20 weeks, and suddenly a week before there was a £200 deposit in the bank that mum had done because they'd spent it all. You couldn't do any of those things now. Look, if you make it as a footballer, particularly now, you're right. It's an unbelievable lifestyle. I'm sure there's some fans going, flipping, I'm just going to pay my mortgage here, and I have to go to a food bank, and these people are moaning about earning all this money. It's really just about the point that it isn't easy, and there is a different side. It's not all cars and parties and all that sort of stuff. That's not really parties anymore at all. And not many people can cope with that. The finance thing, Lewis is 100% correct. We've actually put at our place a wage cap on our young players, because we think you can pay them to fail. So what you really basically Lewis is describing there is lots of kids are being paid to fail because they don't need to strive, they don't need to push themselves. And there's 100% many players, youth team players at quite a few big clubs that will be earning more money per week than players in the Championship, and even players at the bottom end of the Premier League. And that is definitely a worry. What I would say is, for the parents, very, very difficult if you're offered that to say no, because that could be money that buys your child a house and sets them up for life. And if they're sensible about it, it's fantastic. I don't think it does them a great deal of good in the terms of the football. But that's a new thing that's come in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, even at Forest, we lost players that, like Patrick Bamford, going from the sort of wages you earned, Lou, a little bit more maybe, but not much more, when he was 18, to going to Chelsea and earning probably about 50 times that amount of money. So it's not a new phenomenon, but it's been around for a while, but it's certainly a problem for players. And dealing with that is massive, because again, you come from a working class family, exactly what Lewis has described, and suddenly you're earning more money than your family. How would you cope with that? And again, I think that goes back to the relationships you form, whether that be somebody at the club, maybe there's a financial advisor that the club puts in front of a player, maybe there's an agent in the background saying, well, don't trust that person because we'll do it, and maybe they can do it, maybe the family want to do it, but if that person's really good, and has got the kids' best interest at heart, that's huge. Again, I'll just go back to support network, and it might only be one person, it might only be a parent, but the support network around them is absolutely key, and it's no different when it comes to finances.
So you don't have 17-year-olds driving Lamborghinis at Liverpool? That would be a
They
bit of a
wouldn't
red
be.
flag.
You know what? It's fantastic because we have the same rules we used to have at Forest, which is if Paul and then myself saw them driving to that car park with a fancy car, they just got to drive it straight out again. In fact, like Forest, it would be, okay, let's do a little deal here that you can buy a second-hand car for 2-3 grand and that's okay, but you start driving fancy cars, you're done. And when players here in the past have driven a fancy car around to the first team ground, the manager reinforces it, which is massive, and the first team players will have a go at the kids. That is massive as well. That I said to you, that what happens when they move on to the first team, the culture around that is hugely important in terms of supporting that kid, in terms of the values they're going to need to play football, not just in terms of the playing, but the stuff off the pitch as well.
Yeah. I'm conscious of the time. We've got about 10 minutes or so left. I mean, from listening to you in the pub, Lewis, I think it might have been Mikey who said you should be like a mentor or something like that to players. Is that something that you think the game lacks? Maybe it's not you doing it, but more ex-players being a point of contact for young men and trying to help them out, make sure they spend their money wisely, make sure they're mentally okay. Is that something the game's lacking, do you think?
Yeah, and it's something that I've looked into, and it helped. That the hardest thing I think now, and I'm sure Nick would agree, is that there's so much more around these players now. There's so much, you can't get near them. There's all these people advising them and all these people trying to help them, but in reality are that if they wasn't a player there was, and they wasn't destined for this, these people wouldn't be around. They're just hangers on, and they just, whether that's agencies, whether that's kind of advisors, whatever, but there's so many players, the people now to get into. As I was growing up, and Nick says about senior players, on my journey, most time your kind of first port of call or your experience was to go and find a senior pro, was to go and ask a senior pro, or senior pro would get hold of you and say this, maybe do this, do that. Now, these players aren't asking senior pros most of the time. It's their agents or their agency or someone who works for their agency and stuff like this. And that's sometimes the most difficult, I think, moving forward now. It's that there's so much kind of noise and a bubble around these players. They haven't really got, it's really hard to get into them and get that kind of one-on-one time.
Mm-hmm. I'm not going to ask you if it's right or wrong, Nick, because I'm putting you in that position. It's not fair, but do you see more agents more prevalent even in academy levels now than you did when you were at Forest?
Yeah. I mean, the proliferation of agents across the game is mad, and it's, look, clubs are part of the problem, because the going back to what Lewis said about finances that the young players are getting. But yeah, what really, really worries me, I think we can cope with them if they act at 16 upwards, and there'll be some good ones and some bad ones. But we're seeing agents 9 and 10. They're not allowed to, by the way. It's got to be 16 and above, and even that's changing. But they will start to form relationships with kids as young as that, particularly if they've got big social media following. So, yeah, it's like any other industry. So I'm not going around after agents here, because there's some very good ones, but there's more not so good ones, because there's so many people, and it's going to roll back a little bit because the FIFA have now made it harder again to become an agent. But there's a lot of people seeing the money in football and going, I'll have a bit of that, who have either got no experience doing it for themselves, just don't know what they're doing really sometimes. And it's really, I think it's quite worrying. We always speak here, and again, I'm sorry if I might have mentioned this in the last time we spoke, Matt, but we always speak here about a triangle of trust between the club, the player, and the parents. And I think it's often difficult to get that, but if you can get that and keep it that triangle really strong and not let too many influences into it, the more chance the players got. So the more influences, the harder. It's obvious, isn't it? There's more people telling you all different things. And there's some great examples of a really good agent who I know really, really well, having a conversation with one of the ex-Forest players at the time when he was playing for Forest, and doing his best for the kid and trying to help him, but saying exactly the opposite to what his coach was saying. And the agent was an ex-player, and the coach was an ex-player, and they both played loads of games in the Premier League. But even if you listen to, Carragher and Neville at times, they'll disagree about certain things that are going on in games. If you're a young player and you've got different people saying different things to you about the football, and different people saying to you things about your finance, and different people saying things about your social media, and different people saying things about your lifestyle, good luck when you're 17, 18, making sense of all that. So the less influencers, I always think, the better, as long as those influencers are good ones.
Just finally, I guess, for each of you, Lewis, what would you like to see change now, and what do you wish you had back then that was missing? What needs to get better in the game for supporting players?
I don't think you can ever sit there and say, wish I had this, wish I had... Everyone's had different times, and you do the best, and the football club do the best, and at that time, and what's allowed, and what's the best for everyone else. And I think that, I'm sure Nick will say, how he did stuff at Nottingham Forest to how he does stuff now is completely different. That's down to experience. That's down to knowledge over the time. It's down to being in a different football club with different kind of priorities. It's all these little things. So I think that in terms of the main thing is will never change is you just want the best for the young players coming up. You want the best advice. You want the best chance for them to make it a professional footballer, because that is the be all and end all. I think we always talk about the after, and if that doesn't happen, how can these players get help? I think that will hopefully gets better, but at the end of the day, you're now not at that football club. There's another person in your place, and football clubs will try and help to a certain point, but that will still always be the same in any workplace. You are not in that workplace anymore, and there's someone else in your place that they're now trying to take to the next stage. So I think that will always be kind of that aftercare to a certain point. I think social media will now have a massive influence and continue to have a massive influence. I just hope these players can understand that it's not the worst thing not making it. And I've spoke about this before, Matt, in the terms of what when I was coming up, it was kind of, you didn't make it, that was life over, that was dream over. Now, so having been in the last 2.5 years in this non-league game, there's actually another stage. There's a stage where you can, okay, it's not maybe full time, but you can go and earn decent money. You can go and live your footballing dream. You can play at a good standard in a good environment, and you can still live out. Okay, it might not be the dream you had, but you can still live out that football dream. And I think that when I was growing up, it was that point. It was like, have I made it? No. Speaking to a lot of friends who didn't make it, was like, life's over. What do I do now? Do you know what I mean? And I think if to have that outlook, and there's so many opportunities now, there's so many places to still have your footballing dream. And I think that's the big key, because at the end of the day, when it all starts, that's what it is. It's a dream to play football at the highest level. And I say this all the time, just because highest level is everyone's opinion. When people always say, "Oh, he should have played in the Premier League, he should have played," but he had no given right to play in the Premier League. He had no given right to play in the Championship or League One to even make a professional footballer. He still played at a level. He still lived out his dream, and that dream is to play football at the highest level that their capabilities have. And I think that's, if they keep having that opinion and don't think, I've got to be at the top. If I'm not at the top, then all this is worthless, because it's not. It's still a journey.
It's such a difficult one, that, though. I 100% agree with you. And all the time, the messages will always be trying to achieve your potential. Be the best player you can be. But I don't think you can ever stop a kid from dreaming. It's so tough. They want to they want to play in the Premier League, and you know, Trent's recently come out and done some brilliant stuff around some of his teammates who find it really, really difficult when they didn't live that. But Trent had that mindset. Trent had the mindset that this is my dream and I'm going to do it. And he was one of the ones who did do it. So it worked out for him. How do you tell another kid, don't have that dream? So we can say till we're blue in the face, which we do. All you can do is control the controllables and become the best possible player you can be. And if you do that, you've been unbelievably successful. You should be incredibly proud of yourself. Control the things that you can control. Trent can't control that Nathaniel Clyne gets injured and gives him an opportunity. If he didn't get the opportunity, who knows where the journey might have taken him? Maybe he's exactly the same place. Maybe he's in a different place. He can't control that. But what he can control is doing everything he possibly can. But it's very, very difficult. And my experience has been how many times you say that to parents and players about, you know, be the best player you can be. You will still get players who, when they don't quite achieve the level they think they should be playing at, find it incredibly difficult. And this is a big thing in football at the moment. What I would say is there's a lot more support around now, a lot more support around there now than there was. We have a whole department called the Alumni Department looking after the players who've perhaps not got where they wanted to, or maybe they have done and they're out of the game, because that's another thing that we don't really think about. The players have had really successful careers and suddenly it's gone because of their age. There's quite a few examples of players, very high-profile players, have really struggled with that. So where's their support? It's quite complicated, but Lou's way of putting it across, I completely agree. But again, sometimes until people have experienced it and been through it, they don't get it.
And that's it. I'm a look, and I know we talk about a look, and you have to do the right things. But you have to get so much luck along the way. And I'm a lucky one. I got to live out my dream. I got to play the City ground, but it's so easy along that journey, as Nick was privy to at the time. There's so many times along that journey that could have gone a different avenue.
One tackle. You're one tackle away from having no career, Lewis.
And it's not nice to hear, it's not nice to think about, but that's the reality. And that's when I see these, and Nick will see more, that 6, 7, 8, 9, just let them enjoy, let them play, and the journey is so far to even get to a point of like, okay, I've left school now I might look in an academy. There's so much what can happen in that period of time, and I just think that there's so much kind of detailing. They've got to be in the academy at 6. They've got to do this. They've got to go all the way through. From experience and from going through that period, it's a tough childhood. It's a tough childhood. It's draining. It's long, and there's so much what you have to go through emotionally, physically, everything on that journey. I just think that I wish that I could sometimes let people be privy to kind of what it's all about, what that journey is all about, and not from the outside, because I understand from a parent point of view, they want the best for their children, and it's like, right, let me get them in there because that's where the spotlight is, that's where everyone thinks they should be. But it's also, what does that do to the child? What does that do to their development, not just as a footballer, but more importantly as a person, as them growing up in life? Like, is that the best place for them to learn all these the skills and the life skills and the situations? And funny enough, I always say, I play a lot of golf now, and I'm around a lot of golf, play a lot of tournaments. I play with young pros and great players, 16, 17, 21, 20, unbelievable players. But the biggest thing that I find, they struggle to have conversation, because they've spent so much time on their own in this bubble of golf on my own every day. And that's trying to get to this top. They come out of that at 2021, and it's like in the real world, and they're speaking and they're talking, and they can't really hold conversations. They can't really look people in the eye. They don't know how to deal with these circumstances, because what it's been from the start is golf, you're the best, turn up at a tournament, you're on your own with your caddy, you need to be the best. Finish, go home. There's no dialogue, there's no thinking. So I think in terms of let them have a chance to develop as a person, and hopefully the football will come at the side of that. But don't let football be the front runner, because the biggest thing
is a bit of good news, Lou. And our football club's been at the forefront of campaigning for this, and we're quite confident that this is going to happen now. That in Lou's days, you could only play for an academy when you were young. So we're hoping, at least in the younger age groups, which is a good start, at 9, 10, and 11, that the Premier League and the FA and the EFL are going to allow them to play grassroots football and have a different kind of experience of football, playing with the mates, less pressure, and they still come to academies and still get a little bit of get the training and still play for the academies, but they can go and have a different experience of football somewhere else. We think that's a massive step in the right direction to keep the kids.
When I was coming up, as you know, even the thought of if an academy or you're playing for school, it was like no.
I got that wrong, by the way. I got that wrong.
No, and it's even stuff like this. That's what like sometimes people don't see. I never played for my school. I was a footballer playing for Nottingham Forest Academy. Everyone knew football. I was never allowed to play for my school's team. So it's also that dealing with that as a child. Yeah, you're supposed to be this next footballer, but you're never allowed to play for school team. You then, even when you have kind of school PE, it's like you're always anxious, you're always this, you're always that. And because it's the scrutiny of that's how you felt, as that was frowned upon. You're not allowed to play for your school. It was not allowed that. And that's what it was literally that institution of Nottingham Forest Academy. And that was all you did. And that was all you seen. So when that stops at whatever age, how to anyone to then deal with that? Right now, you go and play with your friends. What I wasn't allowed to play with for the last 10, 11 years that I've been kept apart from. Now I've got to go and face them. And in anything, like any kid who's like, I've failed, they'll feel like they failed. So what happens is they stop playing football and they come out of the game, because they'll rather do that than at that point feel like they've got the embarrassment of they've been there, that's not worked out. Well, I can't go back into that scenario. We all know what kids are like, and at that age, so they end up falling out of the game. And they're just little things. So just hearing that, I think that is, you've got to let them have a bit of, still be connected to the normal everyday school environment of being with their friends, because that academy lifestyle is so lonely. It's no one else experiences that.
Yeah, and it's longer than it ever was, and they're definitely forming their identity there. There's definitely a couple of old Nottingham FA schools people that, if they're still around, Jerry and Mike will be loving hearing me say I got that one wrong, because I used to go to war with them too. But there was a big move in football to reduce the number of games the kids were playing from. They were playing like 80 to 100 games a year, 80 to 120 games a year, down to like 40. And the academies took over, and we went along with that. And yeah, I definitely look back on that and go, yeah, that wasn't right. So we do allow our kids here to play for the schools and the local schools associations, and hopefully next year we'll be letting them play grassroots football in the younger end as well.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface. We could do another hour on kids football, another hour on not making it, another hour on what happens when you retire. Well, that's for another time, I think. Thanks to everyone who's watched along. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it opened your eyes a bit, like it opened my eyes, hearing Lewis talk about that sort of stuff in the pub, and now with Lou and Nick as well here today. Lewis, thank you very much.
Not a problem, anytime.
Nick, good to have you back. Hopefully find ways to get you back on again eventually.
It's good to be on, and it's good to see Mr. McGugan here, who I've not seen for many years, and it's great to see him be on his journey and how articulate he is. How many kids you got, Lou?
2 boys.
Wow. Yeah. In my head, all these ex-players are always just depends when I read out big men, like 60-year-olds or 40-year-olds. They always retain that. So, yeah, it's great to see. It's great to see both of you. But no offense, Matt. It's particularly good to see Lewis.
No offense taken. No offense at all. Right, we'll be back on Wednesday or Thursday with the usual transfer chat, when we'll probably say a player is good or rubbish, having learned nothing from this last hour, but hopefully not. In the meantime, have a good few days, everyone, and we shall see you soon.